Sweet. And we're live. I'm really excited actually to get to like all the Cloud Canon stuff. And then specifically, and we won't do it yet, I guess, but to get to like your particular interest in Astro. That like there's been these waves in kind of the build my own blog frameworks in terms of popularity. And like Gatsby was one of the ones 4 years ago, for example, that I first got into, and I moved my site to Gatsby. Then Next.js was really popular, still is very popular, and Astro seems like the one that most recently is replacing like the go-to framework to build your own site, which I have loved and spent a ton of time with Astro.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, having one of these ones that's really content focused, that's, it is a really good for that. Build my own blog, build my docs. It's really awesome to see something sort of in the JavaScript world that's not all, full stack web app, focused like that.
And it's interesting too, because Astro can also do all of that. And I think that's one of the things that people probably don't know is Astro is like primarily known for static site generator, basically, but you can do SSR and you can do API endpoints and you can do all the things. That's part of what I'll end up teaching in my course is like not just doing the static part, but enabling SSR and then doing things like form submissions and that sort of stuff. So
and I think it's I think that because it's a spectrum, right? Sort of going from your static site to your full stack web app, and I think it's really the end you want to start on. And things like Next.js, they really start out as a full stack web app, and you've got to pull all of the components out to make it an SSG. I think Astro, it's much nicer where you start as an SSG and you add in the little bits that you need and plug in the Cloudflare adapter or do what you need to do to get it. Just keeps everything nice and simple and incremental.
Yep, agreed. David in the chat says, big fan of Astro. Their team is coming up with some great features. David, I would love to have you like share some of your favorite features. I think my favorite thing is content collections, which gives you the ability to define like basically TypeScript types with using Zod with your data, and then give you a streamlined way to query it. And the niceties they have with just built-in markdown content is really, really, really nice.
Yeah, content collections were a big favorite here at Cloud Canon too, when they came out sort of in the thick of our Astro investigation. And, that was like, as a CMS, we were like, this is great for us. This is exactly everything we wanted.
Yep. It's so good. Yeah, David, let me know what your favorite features are. And they just announced an update to the image component that I don't even know if it's launched. I need to look into that more. So I'm excited to find out those more recent details.
Yeah. I saw. I don't know if it's still experimental or if it's fully out, but there's been a lot of work with that image optimization that I've been seeing coming up recently that looks super exciting. Like being able to have those images in your markdown front matter as well, and really, tying together that markdown first experience. Super awesome.
And David just mentioned improvements to images coming in 3.0. Yeah, absolutely. Well, if you're ready, let's go ahead and get started. And so tiny bit of context for people as we go through this. If you're in the chat, one, let us know you're here. Say hi. And if you're comfortable with it, let us know where you're tuning in from. And what we're going to talk about is Cloud Canon. This is a new one for me, but the team reached out several months ago, I think, and like babies and that sort of stuff for me led us to this point a few months later. But anyway, like really interesting space for working with embedded like markdown content, getting structure around that, I think is one of the big things. And there's hosting and Git integrations and other pieces, visual editor that we'll talk about. So as people have questions, throw those in the chat. And if you're ready, I will go ahead and kick us off.
Yeah, let's go for it.
Cool. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Compressed FM, a podcast all about web development and design with a little bit of zest. In this episode, we're going to talk about keeping your team in sync with Cloud Canon.
Web development and design, who would have guessed? Well, we can do them both, even add a little zest. So turn up the volume, get ready for the best. Let's get it started in this episode of Compressed.
What's up, everyone? My name is James Hewick, and I am a full-time technical content creator. And I am joined by Tate, who is a developer at CloudCannon, here to walk us through all the things about the title is keeping your team in sync, and that it has like multiple different implications. I think that'll be really exciting. So anyway, Tate, welcome to the stream, the podcast. Do you want to introduce yourself and tell people a little bit about you?
Yeah, sure. Hey, everyone. I'm Tate, and I'm a developer at CloudCannon. I work on the CloudCannon app itself, mostly in the back end, looking after the servers, shoveling the coal into the engines, all that sort of, fun thing.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's actually really interesting that you talk about that because we were kind of leading up to this conversation talking about front end stuff and talking about Astro, which we'll get into. And I think we'll talk a little bit about SvelteKit. And you seem very knowledgeable on like modern front end frameworks as well. And we talked a little bit also about the JavaScript ecosystem is just kind of overwhelming because there's so many different tools in every place that you go. And anyway, so where does your interest in front end come from? Is that something that you like work with at your job at CloudCannon before we even get to CloudCannon? Or is that something you like do more in your spare time? How do you kind of balance the front end and the back end?
Yeah, so I guess at CloudCannon is I guess primarily to start off with a CMS for static sites and static site generators. And so in that sort of world of building sites, it's a lot of that front-end development, that JavaScript framework. And so it's a lot of learned on the job, I think.
Yeah.
At CloudCannon, we all work quite hard to be sort of domain experts, without, gloating too much, to be sort of knowledgeable about at least some subsets of our fields, to have, good knowledge, at least across the team, of what's going on in JavaScript and front end and the SSG world. So that's mainly where that comes from. And then, because we're all sort of JavaScript developers, of course, even in the back end and the app itself, it's all things like Node and Express and these, JavaScript libraries and frameworks there. So we're all sort of, keeping up to date with what happens there, just sort of professionally as well, looking for things that are going to be new and exciting and make CloudCannon better or make our lives easier.
And I guess the integration piece plays a big part of that, because even if you're doing kind of the backend piece, you're still integrating with all these different frameworks that, again, I think we'll talk more about as we go through the episode. But do you want to give kind of like a little bit deeper intro into what CloudCannon is and what sort of problems it solves for developers and content creators?
Yeah, so CloudCannon is a Git-based CMS. So I think the core pitch is that we're really content first. We like markdown and data files, and we're here to really bridge the gap between developer happiness and sort of editor happiness. As we want to have a tool that developers love and works really well for developers, and so that includes supporting the SSGs that developers like, having Git integration and Git syncing, which is where the word sync sort of has a double meaning for us. And supporting all of the Git providers that people are using. And then on the other hand, for editors, we want to provide a really streamlined editing experience where they can get in, make the content changes that they need to make without having to worry too much about the code or the back end, or without having to be afraid that they're gonna click a button and something's gonna break and prod's gonna go down and it's gonna be horrible. So trying to really bridge that gap and make everyone happy sort of in that content website space.
Yeah, got it. I just realized I missed it. I do this every time and I forget to like set this up correctly. I didn't have my Twitch. I didn't have my Twitch tab open, so we got a raid, and unfortunately StreamYard doesn't actually show who the raider was, but I think it was C# Fritz. So anyway, shout out to C# Fritz on Twitch. Thank you for the raid. We can give people, like, we just got started a few minutes ago, but let's give people like slightly more context as we go through this. So This is a live episode of the Compressed FM podcast. C# Fritz confirmed. Thank you for the raid. I appreciate it. So Compressed FM is a podcast that myself and Amy Dutton run. Amy is out. She'll be back on our episode tomorrow. We typically do these on Fridays, but time zone issues, we are doing them early for you in New Zealand and afternoon for me in Central Time Zone in the US. And anyway, we have guests come on and tell us about like things they built, their favorite tools, companies, products that they work for. And in this case, this one is CloudCannon. And again, just kind of got started into this, but basically a Git-based headless CMS that has a few different features that we'll talk about more along the way. So if people on Twitch have questions, or if you have just like context that you feel like you're missing, feel free to ask, and we'll make sure to clarify that and make sure everyone has context. But thank you all for being here and hanging out, and hope you enjoy it. And I think Tate, my next question for you was thinking about like, what's the onboarding process for CloudCannon? An example of this would be like, I have my personal site and other sites that use Astro as an example, and we don't have to talk too specifically about Astro just yet, but my site has embedded Markdown, which has become like one of the favorite ways to do content, I think, for developers, right? Because we like having 100% ownership over everything. We like it all kind of tied together. And sometimes that leads to some mess, right? Like you have all these embedded files, the editing experience is not necessarily what you'd get from like a true headless CMS, et cetera. So thinking about just like average developer has a statically generated blog using some relevant, recent, modern JavaScript framework. What's the onboarding experience to CloudCannon, and what are some of the features that it like provides as people go through the onboarding?
Yeah, I think onboarding, we try to make that ramp as smooth as possible. So I think if you just have a site and it's built with some recent relevant, SSG, you've got your content in Markdown files, maybe you've got some JSON files sitting around that have your SEO type data in it, some navigation builder, something like that. You can take that file, you can take that GitHub repo and connect it to CloudCannon, click on your SSG and we'll sync it down and build it. And then from there, you should be able to pretty much navigate directly to any one of those Markdown files and open it up in our content editor and, just type Markdown with this nice, what you see is what you get, editing experience, be able to open those data files and change them in our form-based editor and things like that. And then your next step from there to really polish off that experience is you can start to add in all of your CloudCannon specific config. And for a lot of these sites, that's just as easy as saying like, an Astro, for example, is my specific content collection is in this folder. My post collection is at, source content posts. And then from there, we'll go through, we can look at that folder, pick out all of those Markdown files, show them together. You can start configuring different, input types. Maybe the front matter field called, description should have this comment on it. It should be a big Markdown text box or just a little text box. This number field should be a number, add nice comments to there for your editors and just really polish up that baseline editing experience.
It's I feel like it's such a missing piece. I'm curious for people listening live or later on in the podcast. Like I'd love to hear either comments live or maybe something on Twitter. If people have experienced that struggle of like having your own embedded Markdown content, and then just things as simple as front matter, when you don't get like, you don't have a template. Like some people do a really good job of like creating like a scaffolding command that they can run. So they run a CLI command. It prompts them like, what's the name of the blog post that you're creating, or what type of content are you creating? And then it like scaffolds out a new Markdown file, and it shows you like, here are the different pieces of front matter that you need. Then you go in and fill that in. And often without that, what we do, or at least what I did, is just copy and paste a previous Markdown file and go in and like change them. And then you forget, like I didn't update the date or tags or description or like whatever it is. And so that sort of editing experience, I think, is super, super helpful. And you mentioned the idea of front matter. And I think this is specifically key, because the markdown editing itself, you can do pretty good markdown editing just by itself in VS Code. Like you can do a preview, you can have it there, etc. But that intelligence around the front matter, that seems key to me. So inside of CloudCannon, I connect to my existing repository. Can it do some sort of like introspection into my code to build out the models for my type, or do I then do the configuration that you're talking about to say like, here's what my content models look like, here are the properties that should be in the front matter, and then like for each new item that I create, it then has fields for each one of those for me to make sure I complete.
So we won't introspect into your code for the most part to work out those front matter inputs. We do some sort of best sense like guessing. So if you've got a front matter input that's like image underscore URL, we
can figure it out.
Yeah, we'll default that to being a URL picker for you. And if you've got something that's underscore code, it will default it to being a little source editor. But otherwise, you'll need to go through and configure those inputs yourself. But yeah, between sort of looking at the names and making a sensible guess there, and looking at the existing data in that field and making a sensible guess. So if you've got a date field, it'll probably end up as a date because you've called it date. But if not, if you'd called it something else for some reason, then if it had a date string in there, well, make that guess and pick it up. And then from there, you can even define what we call schemas for these markdown files. And they're kind of similar to Astro's content collections, which we talked about earlier, where you list out all of the inputs all of the fields in markdown that a new or any entry of that collection should have. And you can make sure they're always present when you create a new one, make sure they're the correct type of input. And, some of them you can auto-generate, but just, add them back in if they're not there, make sure you don't show any extra ones if you haven't listed them in that schema, things like that, just to, again, because we felt this problem with markdown files and front matter and keeping them consistent. And so, that's something we wanted to solve.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a common thing. Again, like I went back and forth. I think when I started like my blog back with Gatsby, which is 4 or 5 years ago, like I used a headless CMS and I really enjoyed it. And then I realized I just want, like, why not just have that in the source code? But then you go back that way and it's like, okay, the editing experience is now slightly limited. So do you have, with the schema definitions, you can do basic like validation things of like required, I would imagine, can you do like minimum length maybe for a title and a max length for a title description, that sort of stuff?
We don't have all of those kinds of input validations available yet. We've got some of them in certain places, but it's definitely something we're aware of and interested in adding. But yeah, for the moment, it's mostly, every post should have this field, or every post should only have these fields and no wacky extra ones.
Yeah.
Or
which is a nice validation piece to have as well.
Yeah. Or some people, they really like the front matter to be in the same order between all of the files. So it'll do things like that.
And this, like those definitions, the schema definition, I think you kind of mentioned a configuration file. Is that a file that gets checked into the actual project repository?
Yep. So we have a cloudcannon.config.yaml or JSON or whatever you choose to have, and you check that in at the root of your repository or somewhere where we can find it. And then typically you'll also have a .cloudcannon folder, which is conventionally where you'll store all of your other CloudCannon related files like schemas, but yeah, you can sort of put them anywhere as long as you tell us where to find them.
So is there thinking about like Astro content collections? And again, for people who maybe haven't seen or heard that before, typically when you just do embedded markdown, like you have markdown files with front matter, and you just hope each one has the content that you expect to be there. And so you get to define these types using Zod with content collections, and it makes it so nice because you get the IntelliSense and types that most of us, or a lot of us now, are used to with TypeScript, to be able to leverage and build stuff faster and not have to guess at what variable or like front matter names are, etc. Rats. I shouldn't have explained so much what it was. Now I forgot what my question was. Talking about content collections with Astro, and
just off the back of talking about schemas, and
I'm thinking maybe it was part of the configuration. Oh, is there any so the way you configure the content collections is through a config file. And so for people who are using content collections, they would have two different configuration files, basically. One in Astro, which from a code perspective still gives them IntelliSense and types and that sort of stuff. And then the configuration file for CloudCannon, which would give the editing experience basically that same functionality.
Yeah. And I think that's a great way to sort of think about it, is that, your content collections are really a developer tool once you get down to it, so I can go post dot and it auto completes everything I want. On the CloudCannon side, we're really bringing that to the editor. So, when they open up a post and look at it, they can see, oh, I need a date, I need a description, and each of these things should look like, this. I
like
need
this
to,
template.
Yeah.
So in that sense, because I've just been thinking about my personal experience. Like I'm the only person working on my blog on my personal site, so I could still benefit from a visual editing experience. But I guess the other kind of additional aspect of this is thinking about like a bigger blog that has a team, right? Like a company website that has a blog and documentation, that sort of thing. So you have developers working on the code, but then you also have potentially specifically content editors that may or may not be technical, may or may not understand code, but they can go in and create and edit content from this visual editor experience, similar to what you do, or I mean, exactly like what you would do in another traditional headless CMS. And the difference here being that this is now connected to the actual source code. So from a developer's perspective, we still have everything we need. It's all connected together. Now you're pulling in the ability for these content editors to create and edit content as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a huge use case we see of these companies with, internal doc sites or, external brand sites, agencies making sites that they're handing off to clients who, are non-technical. It's why they went to an agency. And now they can, they don't have to go back and forth every time they need something changed, or they don't have to risk opening up an HTML file or anything. They can just have that change.
And use kind of what they're used to from an editing experience. That's a great call out. And I think one of the other benefits of that too is looking at, and I'm a huge fan of just headless CMSs in general, but the traditional headless CMS has some sort of impact on the actual code that you write, because you have to query the data from that specific headless CMS, right? Like you're writing code differently. You're potentially creating custom components to translate things that you've created in the headless CMS to like how do they display on the screen. And in this case, there's really no, I don't know the best like phrase to use, but there's no overreach on CloudCannon's part. Like developers still just work with regular markdown, but then the editors get that nice editor experience without any additional, maybe you could call it lock-in, maybe not, but any additional like specific details for that company.
Yeah, for sure. It's I know sometimes I'll open up, say, a template for, this SSG working with this headless CMS. And, sometimes it's just like a single file with like, here's my CMS component. And that just pulls in, literally everything, renders the entire page. There's basically there's no site left. It's all in the CMS. And, as a developer, when I see that, I get a little bit leery. I get a little bit, find it a bit sketchy. Whereas, with CloudCannon, it literally is just, a site that you would write.
Yeah. So I'm curious to learn more about like the Git integration, because I think I've seen other tools kind of come up that have been advertised for developers, and my initial question is like two things. Can I edit this if it's code? Can I work with this code in my editor of choice? And that's not, I don't think, relevant here. Well, I guess it's relevant from the sense of like I still just build my blog the same way I've been doing it, whatever that is. But the other piece is like, is there integration with Git/GitHub or other Git providers? So what does that integration look like? Like how and when are you able to tap into your Git workflow with your content?
Yeah, so you're able to, we integrate with the three main Git providers, so GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, and you are able to, when you're creating a site in CloudCannon, you have the option to either upload the files directly, or you can choose to sync with one of those Git providers. So when you do that, we just give you a list of all of your repos, and you can say sync with this one. And from then on, whenever an update is pushed to the branch of the repo that you're synced to, your site in CloudCannon will detect that. It'll rebuild those new changes. It'll do everything. And then likewise, whenever a change is made to that site on CloudCannon, we will make the change to the relevant piece of source code, sort of save it all down to the files, and then push that back up to that Git repo, which could in turn trigger any other automatic processes you've got sitting there, any GitHub actions, anything like that.
And do you have the ability to like stage commit, like in terms of like if I'm working in the editor, I want to save something so that I can come back to finish it tomorrow, but I'm not ready to actually push the branch, for example. Are you able to do like that sort of workflow as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is another, it's sort of similar to the content collections idea, where these Git branching workflows are something that we use as developers all the time, and we know that they're super powerful. The problem being is that they're really hard to use, and so we sort of just muddle through and make do and force push when we need to. In CloudCannon, we really want to make these flows available for editing and make them really easy to use. So we have a feature called projects, where you can designate a repo based as being a project, and then from there you can create branch sites off of it, which will automatically create a new branch in Git, create a new site in CloudCannon. You can make all of your edits on that site, and then you can publish them back to the main branch of that repo. So yeah, we've got that full staging, production, branching workflows, being able to make drafts and sort of review them and have a pull request and approve that, and then publish it all back.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, that makes sense. And I think it like that functionality has to be there. Again, like when I've heard of other developer, I'm using air quotes, developer focused tools, that's one of my first questions is, are you able to integrate with like source control? And it's good to hear that that's like already a first class citizen in CloudCannon. There was another kind of really interesting feature that I can't remember if we mentioned it since we started recording or not, but the visual editor. Do you want to like kind of introduce the idea of the visual editor in CloudCannon?
Yeah. So this is sort of, the visual editor is the next step up in that onboarding ramp from you've got your files, you've got your content, everything's looking good. Now, instead of having to edit everything directly through, just a text editor, you want to be able to see your site as it looks live, be able to click on the page, have a little pop-up where you can edit the text directly, change images, move things around, and do all of that live visually on your site.
And that's kind of independent of the content piece, right? So that's not just like laying out content for a blog post. It's like laying out any content basically for your entire site. Is that right?
Yeah. So it's will typically be still content living in your front matter, but it's being able to make those edits to your content, to your front matter, and then being able to see them reflected one-to-one on that live site, and likewise being able to click into the live site, click onto something that is front matter, make a change, and see that reflected again back in the data.
Okay, so it is more specifically for front matter. And what does, like, on the deployed site, how do you how do you do how do you track if the user is able to edit that data or not? Like, it has to be associated with a logged in user, right?
Yeah, so it's not actually on the deployed site. So it's through CloudCannon. So when you've got the CloudCannon app open and you click into the visual editor, we load up your site alongside our editing interface, and then we provide all of that. So, typically it'll have no impact on your deployed site. We'll put it behind an environment variable or something. So when you do actually ship your site out to the world, you'll remove all of the tooling that you need for that live editing. Yeah.
Okay. And how, is there any like code that has to be added for there to be the association with how and where I'm displaying front matter from a code perspective, and how the visual editor connects to that?
Yeah. There is a little bit of tooling that you need to add. It varies from static site generator to static site generator. So if we were to take Astro, for example, we've recently released an integration for it in beta with a tool we call Bookshop. And Bookshop is what we use to power a lot of the live editing in SSGs where it's not so naturally available. So yeah, Bookshop is a plugin that you add to your Astro site, and it will go through and find where your front matter is and sort of track where that's being used and add in the necessary tooling to make it be able to live render.
Okay. That's cool. Do any idea how often people go to edit content from that perspective versus like going more to the more traditional editing experience, I guess, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I can't give you any numbers off the top of my head. I know it really depends on what you're editing. So when we have, internally, we also use CloudCannon. And I know for a lot of our marketing sites, they use this live editing quite heavily. And it's really in this page builder workflow that we like to talk about. So when you're, doing something that's maybe less, components in text, but it's more, big blocks put together. There's lots of images and call outs and special components like that. It's a workflow that's very well suited to that, live editing, where it's like, oh, I have, a call out here and an image here, and now I want to swap them around, or I want to change what's in that image. So in a lot of those cases, it is quite popular, and I know, at least internally, used to great success.
Yeah, that makes sense. I could definitely see a mix of people just based on kind of how they envision doing editing, making a choice for themselves of going one way or another. I'm curious. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying that, also internally we use CloudCannon for our documentation. And in that case, instead of using that page building flow, we prefer to go the other way and use our markdown editor with embedded components, because a docs page is more lots of text with little bits of rich content embedded.
Yep. And you started to hint at this, I think, but inside of like the markdown editing, at some point you mentioned kind of the idea of snippets, of throwing in like custom snippets, and or maybe something people are more recently familiar with the idea of just like MDX. So being able to do like actual components inside of your markdown. So can you talk a little bit about how that works?
Yeah, for sure. So this is, it's been a big addition recently to our markdown editor. So a lot of SSGs like Hugo, or like you say, Astra with MDX, have this idea of a short code or a snippet or a component where you can write your markdown and then directly alongside it put a component. And so for something like MDX, that's just JSX HTML style. I do an angle bracket figure, and then I pass it some arguments, and then I put another angle bracket. And so in the past, typically your editors would be expected just to know about these short codes and sort of type them out and just have them there alongside the component. So we built this feature we call snippets, where you can go through and define these different short codes or these components and define what they look like. And then in the editor, we'll go through and pick them out and surface them as these rich little like component boxes that you can, they can have different kinds of image previews, icon previews, text previews. You can click on them and it opens a form editor and it shows you all of the different things that short code or that component needs alongside, that standard CloudCannon input config. So if your component needs to take a number, that's a proper number style input. If it needs to take a date, that's a date style input, things like that. Just again, really bringing a lot of that security, a lot of that ease to the editing process of these things, which is typically much more akin to writing code.
Yep. I love it. I'm kind of curious. I think one of the things that's most annoying with embedded markdown is just adding the cover images, because I need to kind of ask someone if there's a better way to do this. But in my public directory, I have a blog directory, and then under that I have a directory for each one of my blog posts, in addition to the actual markdown file that's in my content collection. And so in the public directory, public images directory, I have that folder so that I could add cover images and the images associated with a given post. And just getting them there is a hassle, because you end up having like folders all over the place, etc. What is the image? What's the experience with images? So I imagine like in the create a new blog post, for example, I imagine there's like a button that you can click to like upload image, take a picture. I guess probably not taking a picture, but like upload a picture from your computer, etc. And that will take that image and just like upload it to the source code. And how and where does it know where to put that?
Yes, this is part of your config again. Okay. So just in your CloudCannon file, you'll say all of my uploads should go to, /public/uploads, for example, and you'll just, put everything in there, and you can configure that per input as well. So if you wanted that to be, /public/upload/blog, but only for your blog posts, that's something you can do as well. And then, we just upload it to that directory and work out what the URL needs to be and save that into the markdown file. And if you need anything more advanced with that, then we also have support for DAMs, for digital asset managers. So like Cloudinary.
Oh, cool. S3. Yeah. Love that.
Yeah. Google Cloud. So you can, instead of browsing files that are in your repo, you can browse files through that
Cloudinary.
Yeah.
And then I'm a big fan of them. Yeah. That's cool. Here's one of the things that I feel like is super missing and inconvenient with just regular markdown, is like if you have images in the middle of a blog post, like not the cover image, which is different because that's the front matter, but images like actually in the markdown. Do you have, I don't know the answer to this or not, but it would be super cool to have the ability to just drag and drop an image onto that markdown editor, and it would have some intelligence of where to put it automatically, and then go ahead and create the link for you inside of markdown. Any chance that the editor can do that?
Oh, I don't know off the top of my head about the drag and drop, but you can definitely look at where you want that image to be, and just, in the sort of top ribbon of the editor, there's an insert image button. And so you can click that and it will make a little rich pop-up, and that will say, oh, do you want to upload a new image? Do you want to, explore your existing images? Do you want to enter something manually? And so they can just either upload to that and it will go to where you've set your uploads to go to, or they can browse through and pick an existing image. So it is all there. You don't have to dig through a file system or anything like that.
Okay. And I think that the drag and drop, I think on top of the functionality that you have, that you just said, the drag and drop could be relatively simple. I think, like just registering that drop and then associating it with the click of that same button. So that sounds like it really solves that use case. Will it just create like an auto generated name for that image, or will it keep the name that the original file name image? Do you know right offhand?
I think it'll probably keep that original file name by default, but it might ask you to confirm again later.
And you could overwrite that if you wanted.
Yeah.
That's really cool. I mean, wow. This is like really, really nice. Again, I love having embedded markdown, but just the editing experience, the management of it, it's just a little bit of a hassle, right? Like you get full control, but it's a little bit of a hassle. So that's really interesting. And I'm wondering if this would be really cool too. And I may be like asking a lot here, or maybe just giving you things to think about for the future. But one of the issues I have with images now that I wish I had set up is some sort of like automated thing for me to drag in an image and it automatically do some resizing, for example, like uploading something to tiny PNG or like something like that, or whatever API can just return back to you like a reasonably sized version of that image, or an optimized version of that image, and put it in the right place intelligently. And especially if it would give it like an automatically generated unique ID for the image, I wouldn't have to worry about like overriding images later on, like with the same name, for example. So then I could just like image, and I know that they're all being like optimized behind the scenes. And I'm a big fan of Cloudinary, so I know I could use that behind the scenes as well. But just having it do an optimization on my actual image would be really cool.
Yeah, I think we've got some amount of that, not quite.
Yeah.
Sorry, I can't make all your dreams come true.
Not yet, at least.
Not yet. Yes, I think we have some small amount of image resizing support in the editor by default, but like you say, you can, with something like Cloudinary, set it up to do sort of smart image resizing on your DAM. And so, that might be as simple as saying like, actually now for this site, all of my images live in the DAM, and then just firing them through up there. Or because we're building your sites, we are sort of a full CI/CD platform. So you also have the option to run any scripts or run any additional processes you need as part of your build. So a lot of people will end up building their site and then having, say, a little post-build step that goes through and takes all of their images and processes them and resizes them and does all of the things that need doing.
Yeah, that makes sense. I need to actually spend some time doing that. Because it's one of those interesting things. Like as a developer, you have the ability to go and code that stuff and automate stuff. And I think oftentimes we forget that, and we don't just take like maybe it takes an hour to write that script and get it to work in a way that like is consistent. But that hour then can save you like 5-10 minutes every time you do a blog post. After you do 10 or 20 blog posts, now you've proven that you've saved yourself time, and it just kind of takes getting there and putting in that initial effort to do it.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm really interested. I'm curious to see like what sort of really creative features CloudCannon would come up with to be able to do that. Cloudinary just launched, and I haven't looked into this specifically myself, but I don't know if you've heard of it. I think it's Media Flows, and it's kind of a drag and drop editor to be able to like basically tap into a new image pipeline. So as you upload a new image, here's the different transformations that it might go through. And one of those might just be an image optimizer, which is kind of what we're talking about. So maybe I should go and look at that too.
Yeah, no, I hadn't heard of that, but that sounds super interesting. I've always been just very impressed with Cloudinary and how easy it is, and how it just works compared to setting up the same thing on AWS with S3 is a lot more involved.
Yeah, they are one of my favorite. I've got a good friend of mine and a few other friends that work there. So I like a huge fan of the team and then also the product. So I talk about and root for Cloudinary a lot. And they, especially for this type of content, I think just really nailed the flexibility to manage and do powerful things, like the ease of managing, but then also doing powerful transformations and stuff. I think they just really nailed. Now I'm kind of thinking I might go refactor some of my blog stuff. Maybe I don't need to do that right now. This is the problem with being developer too, is there's always something else we could spend more time on.
Yeah, throw something else onto the mountain of half finished personal projects.
Yeah, that's just how it works. I think we covered kind of the three main points that we talked about initially. So we talked about like the visual editing experience, the content editing experience, and content connection experience, and then also the being connected to GitHub, Bitbucket, the three. What's the other?
GitLab.
GitLab. Yes, the three like major centralized source code hosts or providers or whatever. Are there any other like any smaller details or features or things that stick out to you that you want to mention before we wrap up?
Oh no, I think we've covered the broad strokes, the big picture idea of
Sorry, that was my alarm. I don't know why I have that, but there it is.
No, I think we've covered enough to be like, why would someone want to use CloudCannon? I think we've got some real cool tech going on. We've got some really cool ideas, and I think those three are a real good taste of what you can look forward to if you wanted to try CloudCannon at any point.
Sweet. Makes sense to me. Yeah, and for people that are listening, cloudcannon.com is where you can find general information. We'll have a link to that in the show notes for the podcast as well. Now, this has been super cool. I'm actually probably going to spend a few minutes like looking at this right after we get done. So I'm excited about that. The last section that we do is our picks and plugs section. So this is where we pick something that we've enjoyed. Oftentimes it's something that we've either watched or listened to or bought on Amazon or something. So do you have anything pick wise that you want to share?
Yeah, I think for my pick is I just recently got a chance to finish watching the third season of Ted Lasso.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I love it. It's such a comfy show. It's so wholesome. It feels like it's very easily going to be one of those annual rewatch kind of comfort shows for me, for sure.
That's awesome. I've heard people talk about it over and over and over again. And I think the only downside is you have to have Apple TV. Is that right, to watch it?
Yeah. That's a
so
Apple
we would
TV original.
Yeah, we probably would like get a month and then watch it all and then get rid of the subscription. But yeah, I've heard so many good things.
Yeah, it's well worth it. It's taught me everything I know about soccer.
Nice.
And most of everything I know about football, the other one.
There you go. Cool. Do you have a plug as well? Anything other than just the cloudcannon.com?
Yeah, we also do a lot of open source tools for static sites. A big one we've done recently is called PageFind. That if anyone has a static site but they're not looking for a CMS, they might be interested in PageFind. It's our search tool for doing search for static sites without a backend, and it's super fast, written in Rust, and you just point it at your site, it runs over it, it indexes everything, and it spits out some JavaScript that you can include just on your main site for full client-side search.
Nice. That's cool. I'll have to look into that too, because I hadn't Hadn't heard of that. Cool. I'm gonna pick. This is gonna sound really boring, but just kind of trying to organize my kitchen a little bit more. And so I used to have these, and I haven't had one in a while. But just the basic brush that like has the soap dispenser in it. So you like open up the bottom, you put soap in it. It has the button, and you can um like get soap to wash your dishes and stuff with the actual brush, and I have to have like a separate soap container. That combined with a little like suction cup mount that you can put inside of the sink. So you like mount that on with the suction cups. You can put the little soap scrub brush on there, and then you don't have to worry about things being on the counter or like things falling into and being in the sink, because a lot of time our like sponges just like sit in the bottom of the sink, which is not ideal, especially as stuff gets busy and you don't know where they are. So not the most exciting thing, but been trying to kind of clean up some of the stuff going on around our house as we are potentially looking to move. So that's kind of where like a lot of my headspace is right now.
Yeah, no, honestly, this is mind blowing technology. Yeah. I've always just got the brush rolling around at the bottom of the sink, trying not to put things on it.
I know. Yeah, I think we got one for like $10 at Target, and they have them on Amazon or wherever, so you can find it pretty easily, I think. And then for my plug, we've talked a little bit about Astro, and that's a platform that I have been really interested in myself. And I am working on a course called Astro. Well, it's at the domain astrocourse.dev. And it's two parts basically. One is kind of building your basic static site blog, getting into a bunch of the kind of final details that people need to create a polished blog. But then we kind of take it to the next level. And we talked about this maybe before we started recording, where people think of Astro as just being a static site generator, but it has a server component as well. So you can do server-side rendered component, you can do API endpoints, you can do form submissions, you can do all these things. And so this course is going to dive into doing all of that with like displaying comments, for example, submitting comments, having authentication, tracking users, and gatekeeping things. So I'm pretty excited about that. So if people are interested, it's at astrocourse.dev. It may be close to being released by the time this officially goes out on the podcast. So just give the URL astrocourse.dev a try and see what the state of it is.
Yeah, it sounds super cool. I'm really interested to see some examples of Astro really getting used for that full server-side case.
Yeah, it really has. It's optimized for the static content, but it really has everything you need to build a full stack app if you so choose. So anyway, big fan there. Cool. So that will wrap up this episode. Tate, thank you for joining us and telling us about CloudCannon. Appreciate you doing that.
Thanks for having me. This has been awesome. New experience for me getting out in the spotlight. It's been super cool.
I love it. We always enjoy having either first time live stream guests or just ones that haven't done it very much. So anyways, I enjoyed it. Thank everyone. Thank you to everyone for listening in. If you're listening to the podcast version of this and you enjoyed it, make sure to leave a rating and review to help other people find the podcast and help us continue to have on amazing guests to continue to do this in the future. In the meantime, that's all we got. Cool. That'll be the end of the recording. And then we'll go ahead and end the broadcast. Thank you everyone for listening in. Thank you everyone who rated over. Hopefully I'll see you in more streams in the future. We do live episodes of the podcast typically every Friday, and those are at 11 a.m. Central American time. So this is a one-off to support our time zones being so different. But if people are interested in checking back in for future episodes, these will be on Fridays at 11 a.m. Central. All right, I'll go ahead and call it. But thanks everyone again for hanging out with us.